right, folks, what is going on? How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo Sports Talk and more. My name is Patrick Moran. Thank you so much for watching, for listening. I do appreciate you guys. Also appreciate our sponsors, Sunny Reds and Imperial Pizza. Make sure you guys get out there and support them. They are very supportive of this show, not to mention two of the best places to go eat, drink, and hang out in all of Buffalo and Western New York. Tuesday podcast time, which means joined by, for the first time in a hot minute, and this is take two. Most people don't know what the hell I'm talking about. We've had some issues yet again. Chris Ostrander, Two in the Box, the Instigator podcast, good friend of the show, one of the more talented bloggers and podcasters out there in our little sphere of Buffalo content creators. What's going on, dude? And do you ever relate to my plight, what I'm going through right now? Because this is actually our second take for like the third time in 5 episodes. I've had an issue with the sound. It's very frustrating, man. What's up?
Not too much. I do, both on the personal, the blogging side, kind of the hobby side, and then also professionally, we do some of the work I do. My day job includes like video recording and like podcast type work. And we've got this cool tool that lets you like record right from your phone. It's awesome. Like HD video, it's incredible. But, sometimes the people driving it aren't familiar with the platform. And so they can't get the camera to load or whatever it may be. And I'm like, all right, call me from your phone. We'll record it this way. So yeah, no, it happens, man. Like I've experienced it. Finally put some art up on the walls of this spare bedroom we got here so I can use as a kind of a podcast layer. But
yeah,
we, the internet at this house is iffy at times too. So I've tried to do video on mine. And if I'm doing video at night where my wife's on her phone, kids are on a tablet, someone's watching TV, the bandwidth drops and I got no video. So it's a crapshoot over here, man, too. So I feel like the more technology you add to the production, the higher the stakes for screw ups are.
Yeah, 100%, bro. And I'll tell you right now, I'm not going to bore everybody with techie stuff. They're here to listen to us chat, which we will, by the way. We're going to talk Sabres today. The Sabres are back, preseason action. We'll get into some of that, and we'll have some Bills talk as well. But yeah, real quick. So I have, the lights. I got a camera, and the mixer that I have is actually a very high-end mixer, and I have 2 of them. I have the newer one that's here in my studio desk, and then I got my old school one that I had the first handful of years, and now I have that packed away, and I use it for live shows. My goal, Chris, when I do a live show, and I've been doing a lot of them at, mainly Sunny Reds and Imperial, but some other places, is the convenience. I love doing live shows. Like, as much fun as this is, you and I doing this, I would have so much more fun if we were like at Imperial Pizza right now, sitting next to each other. So I have a setup for that. And over the last couple of years, I've kind of built duplicates of everything. And now I'm at a point where if I do a show with you, the only thing I hated about doing live shows was having to disconnect cameras and mixers and packing them up and bringing them to the spot and then unload it and then putting it back and then coming home and having to do that. So I've been able to kind of build up duplicates of everything. So when you and I go do a show, nothing in this studio, I come back to the studio and everything except for my laptop itself is still in place. But the old Rodecaster has been reliable. This new one, well, newish anyway, keeps taking a shit on me because it's not the video. I want to blame StreamYard. I want to blame EV Mux. I keep switching back and forth with these platforms, dude. It's not that. It's this goddamn mixer. It cuts out. Sometimes you can't hear me. Sometimes I can't hear you. I don't know what the hell to do. I'm at wit's end right now, so I'm getting really close to just throwing it out and trying to figure out something else. But enough about me. Nobody gives a shit. Fortunately, we're recording this, and we just got to do a kind of a do-over, as opposed to yesterday's show where I was live on the air with Joe from Queens, and there's
no one
nothing.
Wants to hear Joe twice anyway. It's fine.
Yeah, it's true. And also, there's nothing worse than the live stream crashing where it's me and Joe's got to talk to the audience by himself for a good 5 minutes.
It's like with Brick. You can't put Brick on unless he's tracking weather. So
let me ask you this. As a hockey guy, first and foremost, I mean, you're a Bills fan too, and we're going to talk Bills. We always do when I have you on. I apologize for asking this a second time to you now, but after, an off season where you're just writing about projections and moves and transactions and forecasting things a little bit. Now you finally get, some meat and potatoes. Now you got preseason games. You're going to have things that happen on the ice instead of off the ice that you get to write about, that you get to talk about on your show, things of that nature. Does your excitement level start to crank up this time of year?
Yeah, 100%. We always take off a little time from the podcast in August, late July.
Yeah.
Because there's so few things to talk about. And we could keep it rolling for sure. We could find things to talk about, do some off-season content. And there have been years we've done it, but it tends to work out best, I think, all around, just to have that time off from, convening at the same time every week and trying to bang out, 45 minutes to an hour of a podcast when there's little to nothing to talk about. And now that preseason's going, we're going to have games Monday and Tuesday night and then into the weekend. It gives us so much more just range. We don't have to simply talk about will the power play be good? Is Jack Quinn going to be good? There's actually going to be some tangible hockey to talk about, which is super refreshing after, 2.5 months of lull, because once free agency cools off mid-July, it's a lot tougher to get content put together unless you're really, really spending a lot of time cobbling together and doing the work. And, 2 kids, they got stuff going on. Work, it becomes a lot harder to get all that together on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis. So very excited that the season's up and running.
Hockey and football is one of the big differences in the offseason. Like football, the offseason just never seems to end. There's like free agent season. There's trades go on all the time now, but then there's draft season. It feels like hockey, like especially this year, because the draft and then free agency was a few days later. It feels like trades, free agency, and the draft is all about like a 10 to 14 day window, and then it's like, well, we'll see you at training camp, which of course the Sabres are now in, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and maybe it changes a tiny bit with the new CBA and the new schedule, where they're going to try to move the cup being awarded. They're going to try to move that up a little bit, so you're not running into like June 20th or anything like that with a game 7 of a potential cup final. Maybe that helps a bit in terms of at least breaking up the content. But at the end of the day, if the NHL draft's still going to be end of June, just before the new league season starts on July 1st, and that's when free agency begins, I think that cadence is going to stay the same. And unless the NHL somewhat miraculously becomes an even bigger global phenomenon, or at least national phenomenon like the NFL is, it's going to be a lot harder to kind of have that year-round content churn that the NFL has. And to your point, the way, free agency, combine, draft, it's all spread really nicely. And then you got mini camps and training camp itself. That's all spread so nicely that it allows the NFL to have that cadence, whereas the NHL just doesn't have the same structure. So
I feel like I need to say this every time around this time of year, because some people get this show mistaken for a Buffalo Bills podcast, and it's not. It's Talking Buffalo. It's called Talking Buffalo for a reason. I feel like I need to put out this disclaimer because we are getting into hockey season, and I do plan on making a more concerted effort actually than ever to kind of have a little more of a balance and cover the Sabres more consistently. I will attempt to cover them more objectively. It's funny because the Bills, Chris, I kind of look at them from the lens of for good reason, a fan that's happy with how the team is playing, every year. There's lots of reasons to be optimistic. Whereas with the Sabres, it is a very disgruntled fan perspective, and it's annoying and it's been frustrating. And I think there's a lot of people, at least right now, and maybe they'll come back. Winning cures all. It always does in every sport and every team and every organization. But I think there's a lot of Sabres fans right now that are either former Sabres fans or they're Sabres fans, but they don't care. You know what I mean? Like right now, it's like, yeah, we're great. The season starts, well, whatever. I kind of want to talk about a few reasons why I think people should care. And the first thing I wanted to ask you is, does it feel to you like there's just a lot more at stake this season maybe than some of the past? And the reason why I say that is because if this team goes out and they're cellar dwelling again and they're near the bottom and they're out of it in January, February, I feel like some fans that are still sticking around, that are holding on to, that thread of hope, they could lose more fans forever. with with another awful season. I feel like there's a lot at stake that season for that reason alone. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. They're bleeding, right? They're bleeding fans, and if they suck again, if by December, if they're in a 10-game losing streak at the end of December, you're going to bleed even more, and no one's going to want to talk about the draft. No one's going to want to talk about their prospects at all, let alone anyone who's left. And yeah, so it would feel pretty bleak, even more bleak than it has been. It is the threat is looming. That if they continue to play poorly and continue not to perform, that you're going to just keep bleeding those fans. I mean, what are they at? Probably like, what did Welly say at that one radio hit? I forget what he said about their season ticket base. I don't think it's at 10,000 right now.
Right.
But if it keeps dwindling, let's say optimistically they're at 9,500, right? Like just to put a number on it. If that dips to 8,000, to dip below 8, like at what point are they like, are alarm bells going off in the building then too? So it's from a business perspective, minimally, you got to hope that you get some fans back, and from a fan perspective, you just want to play some good hockey. So
sure,
it's tough, man. It's been 14 years. I think there's some rhymes with what happened with the Bills. As the Bills drought kept dragging on, and there would always be those glimmers, but in those real dark days, you get into December of some of those seasons, and it's just throwaway games, nothing to look forward to. I think there's some similarities there where it's just like it felt hopeless. You felt like they had no answers whatsoever. Like the Rex Ryan years, I think, are a good example of that. It's just like, what the hell is going on here? What, they can't figure things out. And then then the light switch went off. So you just got to hope they get maybe a little bit of luck is on their side, and maybe they finally make some of the right choices in the offseason. So.
Well, let me ask you this, and I'm kind of going into, let's see. So you had pre-Jack, we're talking about drought, like reiterations of this hockey team. So you had the initial drought, the first solid handful of years, which it happens, teams go through droughts. So you had the pre-Jack Eichel era of Sabres hockey.
Right.
Then the next iteration was, we're going to tank. You got Reinhard with the second overall pick, and then of course the tank was for Jack Eichel. So you got the Jack Eichel era. Now, so we'll call that the second edition of the drought Sabres, like that era. Clearly, that doesn't work. I feel like right now we're in the third kind of edition where it's the post Jack Eichel and that group, that core. But am I right to say that if things don't work out at all this year, that we're going to head into a new era? Because I would certainly think if this team misses the playoffs, or maybe depending on how they miss the playoffs, maybe I should say it that way instead, you're probably looking at a new general manager. You're probably looking at a new head coach. Neither of them would even have to be fired. This is the last year of their contracts, or both of them. So in some ways, they already feel like kind of sitting ducks here, but you're going to get a new coach. You're going to get a new GM. And when you do that, that often leads to a lot of roster personnel changes. A coach might come in and say, well, I don't want this. I don't want that. I want to do this. I want to do that. General manager, kind of the same deal. Are we talking about, like, if things don't work out right now, a new era coming? Yet another one of a Sabres rebuild. I'm not going to call it a retool, but a rebuild. Like guys like Rasmus Dahlin, is he going to want out? Is Tage Thompson going to be like, come on, man, what are we doing here? Stuff like that. I don't know, Chris, I guess I'm just being long-winded and asking you or telling you. I just think there's a lot on the line this year, not just in terms of ending the drought, but for the present and the future of this organization.
I think so. Yeah, I think, and not to relitigate the entirety of the drought, but yeah, I think you summed it up right, is where you had, that post-Miller Lucic hit, where they started chasing toughness, and that team was already kind of questionable as to whether or not that core could do it, get it done, and they spiraled from that point on, and that's where that drought starts, right? Is in the aftermath of that hit, and in the aftermath of that season, and that's kind of that Darcy into Tim Murray era where they're really, that's where they start the rebuild. They're selling pieces off, they're looking to the draft, looking to the future. That transitions into the Eichel era, post-tank, like you said, And then, I think you probably draw the line at Kevin Adams. So, is this the Adams era? Is this the Dahlin core era? I think you could call it whatever you wanted. But yeah, definitely in that third phase of where this roller coaster ride has gone. And yeah, I mean, Adams has had more than enough time at this point to prove whether or not he's a good enough GM. And so with all the contracts up, both on the staff and in the front office, if this is not a good year, you would think that they would be all on their way out. I suppose it's possible that Terry Pagula continues to value continuity or the people he trusts or whatever, and maybe that's a stay of execution for Adams, but maybe that means he's moved to some other role, like was rumored this offseason. There's still a lot of unknowns there. If we're again, and we're assuming that it's going to be, if we're assuming it's a bad year, of course, if they break the drought, these guys are all going to be safe. But it points to if you presume a down year again or just an iffy year and they miss the playoffs by a handful of points, that Kekalainen probably comes in as GM. He probably goes and looks for a coach, and now you're starting to you got to reset, and whether or not that it's accompanied by a similar exodus to what you saw with Eichel and Reinhart and that era of player is kind of a different question. I think it's a different talking point because you have the management side, which we at least have some answers on from a contract perspective, but the player perspective, if those guys are asking out, then you're running it back to those first Kevin Adams years. Not that COVID year where they signed Taylor Hall,
right?
Still really going for it, but that next year where Adams like, okay, now we got to reset it, and you're talking roster reset, so you're talking, and sorry, this could sound like Groundhog Day, but you're talking top of the draft, you're talking players for picks and prospects, and you're trying to reset your pipeline again, and so that's daunting, and I think if we talked about bleeding fans, I think you're gonna hemorrhage fans if that's the case. So it can snowball. It's been a snowball. It's been 14 years of snowballing, but it can get out of control on them. I think if it's a bad year, I don't necessarily think it's going to be a bad year, but if that's the result.
Let me ask you this about Alex Tuch. He's saying the right things in front of the podium. Kevin Adams is saying the right things about Alex Tuch in front of the podium. I believe I believe a sense of they're being genuine. I believe both sides, but Alex Tuch has not signed. And do you feel like at this point, maybe the biggest reason why he hasn't signed is because of some of the stuff we're talking about, everything that's at stake here, a potential, other reset or necessarily an entire, you don't got to turn the roster upside down. That's not necessarily what I'm suggesting, but do you think that maybe Alex Tuch wants to see how things are going and what direction it feels like they're going into him before he inks that deal? That in the case of Alex Tuch, it's not just about how much money can I get from this organization. It's more than just a contract. He really needs to see. I say all this now, he'll probably sign a long-term extension tomorrow. But as it feels to me that way, like maybe he wants to take a real good look through the lens of what is going on with this organization before he commits. What's your sense when it comes to that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. It's something that I've, we've talked about this before, even it's something that I've kind of felt is that the potential for, I'm not worried that he's not re-signed, right? Like I can hold off on that, on raising any flags on that until later in the year. But it is a distinct possibility that as Alex Tuch looks at this team, looks at this roster, and maybe more specifically looks at the offseason or even last offseason and says, well, in all of our meetings, Kevin tells me that, that they're serious about building a winner and that, we can't hesitate anymore. It's go time, whatever, all the buzzwords that Adams has used. And then, last offseason in particular was pretty dreadful in terms of exciting movement and, Ryan McLeod notwithstanding. But, at least this year you had the Paterka trade, but still, they didn't turn the roster over areas that they could. It was still a pretty basic conservative approach to the offseason. So, yeah, Alex could certainly be looking at this like, I just don't know if this organization is heading in the direction that I want to be heading with it.
Right.
And so that could absolutely be giving him pause. It also could be something as simple as he wants 7 years, the Sabres want to give him 4, and they agree on a cap hit, but they don't agree on terms. So it could be that simple, and it could be the more alarming piece where it's like I just don't know if this is a team I want to play for 7 more years. I might want to go look at the market.
This certainly feels like a situation where Alex Tuch has the leverage, right?
Yeah, for sure.
100%.
Joey, what leverage do the Sabres have? Quite frankly, in any aspect, even off ice.
That's true.
If you're calling me to buy season, I'd be like, you can pay me to go to the games.
That is true. 100%.
Yeah.
That is true. Let me ask you this: what do you think? Initially, this is the way it looks to start. Obviously, hockey, it changes a lot with line combinations, but it appears that Norris will start the year with Benson and Tage Thompson, and Kulich will be the second line center between Quinn, and it's going to be Tuch. Like right now, Doan is on that line because Tuch's not in the lineup yet. Like this first preseason game, that's going to be the line tonight. Again, we're not going to talk about the game because it already been played by the time people listen, but Kulich, Quinn, and Doan. I would assume that eventually he's going to be Tuch as soon as he's in the lineup. But just that top six right now, you see that in front of your face. What do you think?
I think it's okay. I mean, I'm not as down on Norris as other people are. I've liked him as a player in Ottawa, and so if he can stay healthy, he's a good offensive talent. And I think if you play him with Tage, play just about anyone with Tage Thompson at this point, you're going to get good results. So I'm fine if it's him and Thompson and whatever deficiencies maybe that are in Norris's game can be buoyed by Thompson. And then with all that being said, I love that Thompson, Kulich, Benson line at the end of the year. I thought they had something going there, but I understand that Norris they think he's the number one center. That's fine. Let him serve as one. And Kulich might be a little raw, and it might be a little bit tougher for him to really thrive away from Thompson. That's certainly a possibility, but whether it's Tuch and Quinn, if it's Tuch and Doan, maybe, they slide Quinn down with Zucker and McLeod. I think they have three serviceable lines. Thompson's an elite talent. It's just, it's a matter of who can produce. If Norris stays healthy and he gives them, because I think he had 24 goals overall last year, 21 goals in 50 some odd games. If he plays 70 games, is he a 30 goal scorer? Can Benson finally break out offensively? Is Kulich gonna progress a step further than he did last year? Because if all three of those things happen, I think I should throw Josh Doan in there too. Can Josh Doan flirt with 20 goals? You have the makings of a good group. So I have optimism in that sense for their forward group. I don't think it's probably the strength of their roster, quite frankly. I know Kevin Adams thinks it's the defense, but it actually, given how it's lined up right now, and just in my take on it is, I think those first three lines are pretty solid.
Let me, for people who, at least on Twitter anyway, and I know you know of him, NT Ryder, hockey, he's always tweeting about hockey. He's a good hockey mind. So the pairings came out for Monday, and Byram's in the lineup. Dahlin's not playing this first game. Let me read a tweet that he said. I got to ask you this, all right? So this, again, Save Us Simmons is his handle, or at NT Ryder 825. He said, based on the construction of these groups, I wonder if people are kind of discounting the possibility they pair Dahlin with Samuelsson to open the season. So my question for you is, should I prepare to throw myself out the window right now? Because
maybe
I don't know that I can handle a Dahlin-Samuelsson pairing. I would certainly think that what they did with Byram this offseason would be, the only, from what I've heard, Chris, from smarter hockey people like you and others, Byram plays best when he's with Dahlin. That's going to happen, correct?
I hope so. And even if Byram could play away from Dahlin, let's say there's a world where Bowen Byram is just, he's just good, right? He's good with whoever he plays with. He's a solid player. Then you can play him anywhere in the lineup. But why did you re-sign him for $6.25 million? And that money's not as bad as it was a couple years ago with this new cap.
Sure.
It's cheaper against the cap this year than it would have been even last year. But still, you're paying $6 million to a guy to play on your third pair. I don't get that. I don't understand how that's the best way to allocate your cap spending. And then to add to it, he is a player, at least in his time here in Buffalo, that has shown he is going to be largely dependent on Rasmus Dahlin to be as effective as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I know Connor Timmins does some things well. I know he has some good underlying play driving traits, but he's not Rasmus Dahlin. And so I can't imagine that Timmins is going to provide the same foundation that Byram can build upon that Dahlin does. And so I find it very odd that they would go down that path if that is indeed where they go here. And I know Ruff said, like, don't read too much into this, that Merck is playing with Byram, but I think I would read more into the fact that Dahlin and Samuelson are practicing together today, less so than anything else. Kind of like to Kevin's tweet there. Yeah, it's peculiar. I'm trying to temper it just because it's preseason game number 1.
Yeah,
and we'll see what they do come. When they play tonight, they play Monday, Tuesday, and they play Friday, Saturday. So come Sunday, things could be totally different with their practice groups when they send guys back and all that. So you can weather the storm maybe for the week and see what happens. But if that is indeed what they do, I would be totally perplexed by their choice.
Let me ask you one more question here about the preseason. So when I watch the Bills in preseason, there's a couple things, that I'll look for. I also know that it really doesn't mean shit, man. There's so many times, and Joe from Queens and I fight about this all the time. To him, the preseason never means anything ever. I don't go that far. I disagree. Like on the Bills side, I think Tyrell Shavers made the team in the preseason this year. Not a lot of guys, but for the most part, it's meaningless, but there are things that do matter, things that I like to look for. When it comes to the Sabres in preseason, which again is starting here on Monday night, 4 games just over this week alone, is there anything that like you are looking for? What are you, if anything, are you most hoping to see? What can you take out of preseason games, which again, you're not always getting 100% full throttle, effort per se on the preseason. What do you think? As my phone's going off here.
Yeah, part of it is definitely who's playing with who. That's for sure part of it. Is just to the point we just talked through with Samuelson, Dahlin, right? Like, once because Mirko was probably going to go back to Seattle at some point here. I know they sent a couple guys back to junior already. I would presume that he'll go back soon enough. Maybe they give him a game. Maybe they give him one more game on Friday or Saturday. But I don't think Mirko will be here too much longer. And so once he's gone and they send more guys back to junior, maybe they start to ferret out the Rochester group too. You'll start to see that get refined. And so that's part of it, though, because, they have Quinn, Kulik, Doan playing on Monday, and then they have Danforth, Krebs, and Malenstein as another line. And so that, that you can kind of take some hints from where the lineup goes. Goaltending is definitely one of them, even though you have mixed groups. How the goaltenders play is always something I try to keep an eye on because, Devin Levi earned the job a couple years ago. He didn't start great. Once the regular season started, it kind of fell apart on him, but he was their best goalie in camp in the preseason. And so, you can inform yourself on that. And then there are just individual pieces. Like if a guy who, and this isn't a team with a roster bubble per se. I think if you just look at the roster groupings as they open camp, it says everything you need to see. They seem to know who they want in the NHL this year and who they want in the AHL. But for example, Monday night, Nikita Novikov will be playing. And that's a guy who I think people are pretty high on. He was a later pick, but he's a big dude, and he was kind of a promising late pick. And so to see him against some more NHL players on NHL ice is great. That's something that you can to look to too. So there's always guys you can kind of go, you can put a little check mark next to on the roster, be like, oh, I hope I can see something out of him. And so like those are the things I always try to take away from preseason. It's not necessarily if they're winning or losing games, but when they have a group like that first line tonight, Quinn, Kulik, and Doan, how do they look together? Do they generate any offense? Are they dangerous? When there are notable prospects, if Constellanis gets in the game on Tuesday, how does he look? Does he fit in? Do you feel like he might be getting close because of how he's performing? That's the sort of thing I always try to look for when it comes to the preseason.
All right, guys, let's take a quick break, and we'll come back on the other side, and we'll get in on some Bills talk right after this. All right, back here with Chris Ostrander, Two in the Box, the Instigator podcast. Really, really good stuff. Make sure you go check it out. Hockey season is back, but we're going to talk some Buffalo Bills here. How are you fascinated? Right? This fascinates me. We're 3 games into the season, and the AFC East is pretty much over already. It kind of feels like if the Bills beat New England in Week 5 here in Buffalo, Highmark Stadium, you can put that banner up. I feel like already. Look, man. It used to be like Christmas, then it'd be Thanksgiving, Halloween. Now we're talking like early October, dude. This race is almost over already. Are you not stunned that the Bills are 3-0? Not stunned that the Bills are first in the AFC East, but are you a little surprised at just the gaping hole between these teams right now? Or is this kind of what you expected?
In a sense, no, because the other 3 teams are just so, well, at least the Jets and the Patriots, they're pretty woebegone teams. So it's not overly surprising that they're struggling. I am a little surprised that the Dolphins have been as bad as they are.
Yeah.
I know they put a scare into the Bills last Thursday, but, they have not been very good. And, what was it? How far into the fourth quarter did Tua take to break 100 yards? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is the 70-0 offense. What happened? So I think, I have very little respect for the Dolphins overall. I don't think they're a very threatening team right now. And they're the best of the 3, at least on paper, you'd say, of the AFC. So in one sense, I'm like, yeah, no, this is about what I expected. But I didn't think, because I was thinking the same thing, even looking at the standings and the scores on Sunday. As Sunday was unfolding, I was like, geez, the Bills aren't going to have any threat to the AFC East. And it's September 21st.
Let me tell you, Chris, so I watch all 22 I've been doing it this is my 3rd season where I really have made a concerted effort to spend at least a few hours the day after a Bills game, and I will watch the all 22 and I will look for everything I possibly can. I am telling you that there's not a lot of games that I can remember where stats looked more deceiving than what Tua did on last Thursday night. The stats, I don't have them in front of me, but it was 22 of 28. He ended up getting a little up there in yards, but yeah, late in the game, he had some yards. The yardage wasn't impressive, but he had 2 touchdown passes, and I'm like, well, that looks respectable. I cannot tell you on film how many guys were wide open that he just didn't see. He went to whatever the first read was, he was going there. It's a timing-based offense. He's a timing-based quarterback. And if he just goes through progressions more, and a lot of these times, it wasn't even pressure. That interception he threw, Deion Walker, it was a great pressure. He got rid of it quicker. But somebody pointed out, I think maybe Brent Solak, great film guy, that there was something that he saw pre-snap that Tua should have saw, where he knew Bernard would be sliding over because Rat moved up, and he just doesn't see stuff. And you could really see it on film, man. If I'm a Miami Dolphin fan, I'm ready to move on for this guy. He's just not it, dude. He is just not it. He missed so much on film. It was just nuts to me. So you didn't expect the Jets or the Patriots. What you're seeing is pretty much what you expected with them, because I thought the Patriots are going to be at least moderately better than what I've seen.
We'll see what comes out from them, I suppose, as the year unfolds. Maybe it's just a bit of bad luck and, just not, they just haven't had a good start. But
no, you're right. They're not playing good.
Yeah, it's they got a young quarterback. They don't have a ton of talent on either side of the ball. I just don't think they're, I think they're still trying to feel out this post-Belichick, post-Brady era.
Yeah.
And so, as good as May was as a prospect, I think they got some work to do to round that roster out around him. And so, I had my usual line. People ask me, do you think the Bills are going to be good? I'm like, yeah, they'll win the division. They'll win 12 games or 13 games, and, we'll see how they do in January.
Yeah.
I just didn't think it would come this quickly.
No. Well, let me ask you this then. So the Bills are 3-0. However, style points haven't been great in 2 of the 3 games. They kind of got their asses whooped for a lot of the Ravens game. Came on really late. It was an incredible comeback, and that's just what, great football teams find a way to win. Ed Oliver makes an amazing play on Henry to cause that fumble. It flipped that game. They go to New Jersey and they dominate the Jets. I'm not going to look too much into that. And they got, I feel like, a bigger scare than they needed to against Miami. Although I do think Miami, and you just said this a few minutes ago, I never thought it was going to be quite the blowout that a lot of people did. What were they, 12.5-point favorites?
Yeah, no,
or some shit like that. Miami's a pretty good football team with a lot of weapons on paper. I also feel, like I said, the Bills didn't play their best game. Understandable, short week, a couple key injuries. And like I said, Tua just really, I feel like the Bills defense in some ways lucked out a little bit. But anyway, my whole point is style points haven't always been there, but they are 3-0. Now you cover hockey, but you pay plenty of attention to the Bills. You're on social media plenty, whether it's blogs, whether it's podcasts, whether it's just people tweeting. Are you a little bit taken back, or do you feel like fans are being a little too critical of a team that's 3-0? Like, I'll tell you, I had a show with Joe from Queens last night, and I'm thinking a couple points during the show, I'd be like, I wouldn't know this team was 3-0 going by the way. And I was guilty of it too. Finding things. There's a lot of criticism, especially with the defense. I don't really know what you're thinking if you're criticizing the offense much, but the defense hasn't looked great, but they get takeaways. I don't know. I just feel like, are we getting a little spoiled as a fan base here? Because this team's 3-0. Maybe you're not seeing what I'm seeing, but I see a lot of criticism online about this team for being an undefeated team.
I'm sure there's 12 games over the last handful, 2 or 3 years that you could go back and be like, if they didn't execute here, if this fumble didn't go their way, whatever, those are wins that turn to losses. I'm sure there's plenty of those games. And so just like that Ravens game probably should have been a Ravens win. And as nervy as the Dolphins game was, the record is the record, and it's just going to be a matter of getting that defense cleaned up and getting them to be a little bit more consistent. That being said, I tweeted about this during the game, but if that second quarter drive doesn't stall out, and we can put it on the drops, we can put it on play calling, being a little too conservative, but they were driving and they were. Yeah. It seemed like their foot was on the gas, and all of a sudden, they got down, was about the 30 roughly, right? And all of a sudden they got a little cute, and then you missed the field goal. Dolphins go down and score, and then it went from being 21-7 to 14-14. Yeah, quite quickly. And so, just humor me here, but if they do score there, and if it's just 17-7 at the end of the half, or it's 21-7 and they double dip, you were 2 or 3 plays from that being 28-7 with about 10 minutes left in the third. And then that's a totally different conversation. So, I think that Dolphins game, they let the Dolphins hang around. I also wonder if that game was played on Sunday versus Thursday, how much better do the Bills look just instead of being on short rest? And it goes for the Dolphins too, but just from a Bills perspective, are they a little sharper? Are they a little cleaner? And do they handle the Dolphins better than they did? That's
a great point.
So I'm not too concerned yet. I don't love how the defense is played, and especially because the Ravens just ran on them, and then the Dolphins were just clinical on third downs. So 2 different areas of the game that you need them to be better and sharper in. But you just hope they can find their footing. Some of the early injury luck hasn't been encouraging though.
No,
getting the defense cleaned up.
I look. Again, they're 3-0. That doesn't mean everything's all sunshine and flowers. They do have problems on the defense. The run game got gashed against the Ravens straight up. The Miami game, the pass rush was awful for the most part in this game. TJ Sanders, their second round rookie, looks like he's not ready to be on a field right now. I would not be surprised sooner or later if he's inactive. I think you might see Jordan Phillips get a call up. Larry Ogunjobi will be back after week 6. I think for the time being, TJ Sanders. Not to say he won't be a good player. I know he's a second-round guy. Don't call him Boogie Basham or all these other busts already. Some guys, especially on the defensive line, just take more time to develop. Deion Walker looks significantly better right now than TJ Sanders. But Greg Roselle's got a half a sack this season. He's been borderline invisible.
Right.
Trey White, I still don't know what he is right now. Will Max Searson play? I don't know. Probably not, because Sean's not big on rookies missing a lot of time and then just seamlessly getting back into the lineup. You talked about that second or the end of the first half. you're right. Because the Bills miss a field goal, but also they still should have stopped them and had 4 minutes left. But on third down, Trey White, who had a free run at Tua, perfectly called blitz by Bobby Babbage, just whiffs on Tua. Tua gets outside, they make the first down, and they ultimately go take up all the time and score a touchdown. So the Bills could have still gotten a field goal or a touchdown by getting the ball back and then double dipping, as you said. So anyway, yes, it's not a perfect team. There's problems. And maybe I got no life and I'm just on Twitter too much. But I see a lot of people bitching about a team that is just really freaking good right now. And the AFC, let's point to, the AFC East is pretty much a done deal already. The race for the number 1 seed looks pretty damn good for the Bills right now, too. I'm going through their schedule, Chris. So they already beat the Ravens. Obviously, that matters huge because you got to figure Baltimore's going to be there near the end of the season. They got Kansas City, Tampa, Philly. Those are all going to be big tests. I got Tampa in there because they're 3-0, but all those games are at Highmark Stadium. All 3 of those games are at Highmark Stadium. They've beaten the Chiefs the last 4 years in the regular season. Philly will obviously be really tough. I think the Bills are a better team than Tampa, but they at least deserve to be in there. But anyway, those games are at home. 2 road games, and I'm like, at the beginning of the season, I'm like, oh shit, man. These are going to be tough games. And they still might be, but they're at Atlanta and at Houston. Both those teams look like dog shit right now. Atlanta just lost 30-0 to Carolina yesterday on Sunday. That's wild. Joey Burrow is probably not going to be back for the Cincinnati game when they come to Buffalo December 7th. So I'm looking at it. I'm like, what the hell? At Pittsburgh in week 13 feels like the toughest road game that they have. You mentioned earlier, they probably win 12 or 13 games. I think if they win 12 games, I'd be really disappointed in this team right now.
You're not wrong. I mean, it's a pretty friendly schedule. I do think like that October 13th stretch where they're going to Atlanta, and I know Atlanta's no great shakes, but you go Atlanta, Carolina back to back on the road, coming back to the Chiefs, then you're back on the road with the Dolphins, and then Buccaneers coming in. Like that's a pretty tricky stretch. And you can even extend it to the Texans game, given that that's on the road too. That might be a little bit of a stretch where if they drop a game or two, are people like, oh well, here you go. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of the point that comes up, I feel like, every now and then in the off season where it's a team gets a tough schedule. The schedule grades out tough when it comes out because of who they're hosting and all that. And then as the season unfolds, Joe Burrow's hurt or the Steelers offense just isn't good enough or whatever it may be. And all of a sudden that real tricky schedule goes from, an A+ in terms of difficulty to a C real quick. And so, once the games are playing. So I do think it's setting up to be pretty advantageous for the Bills. And even just as we talked about with the East, if those 3 teams continue to play the way they are, the remaining division games aren't going to be much of a stress, right? And so that's what they play twice. So yeah, it's four more games that you're feeling pretty confident putting a W next to.
Yeah,
right off the hop. So they're trending in the right direction for sure. I'm with you there. They still got to win their games. They got to win the games that are going to matter. And that Chiefs game is going to loom large, but the Chiefs haven't been impressive so far. Maybe they're better once they get Rashee Rice back. I don't know, but
they do this every year. It feels like they always lug around early, and the offense looks out of sync, and we write them off.
Yeah,
and they play their best football when they absolutely when they need a drive, when they need a stop, when they need a play that the defense doesn't see coming. They just always seem to find that way. So I'm not even close to writing the Chiefs off, but you're not wrong. They do look really pedestrian so far this season.
No, they're Jason, right? You got to kill them. And you got to know that he's dead on camera. Yeah.
One last point I want to make, because again, I just called Atlanta and Houston dog shit. Like they're playing. I didn't say they're dog shit. I said they're playing like dog shit right now. But you got to be careful, obviously. And this is one of the things I love the most about the Bills, and I think a lot of people take for granted. Look, Cleveland just beat Green Bay. I thought Green Bay might win 14, 15 games this year, and they still might. But they just went to Cleveland and they lost. Mm-hmm. Anything could obviously happen in the NFL. That's important to say. But what I think the Bills are exceptionally good at, they don't lose to teams that they're supposed to beat. It is very rare. A couple years ago, they lost at Foxborough. That was embarrassing. but that's an anomaly. That doesn't happen with the Bills. They go out and they handle business. Like what you saw in week 2 against an inferior Jets team, that's what you see more often than not with the Bills, which I think is a real credit to Sean McDermott and just the way this team is prepared to play every single week. So I wanted to point that out. Last question, I'm going to let you go. There's 2 other teams in AFC right now that are also 3-0. The Colts, the Chargers. Are either or both of those teams for real? Are they legit contenders when it gets to be January? Are they very much in the mix? What do you think right now as we get near the end of September?
I find it hard to put a lot of faith in Daniel Jones just because of his track record. But, they've been good. The Colts have been darn good to start this year. So you gotta give them some respect. I mean, the Chargers are the team you gotta be watching though. I mean, Herbert's been good since he's come in the league. They've had some, they're if there's a team that has wackier stuff happen to it than the Bills, it's the Chargers. And so, if they get their demons sorted out, that they could be a threat. So right now, I mean, of those two, it's the Chargers for me. As much as they screw around in January and don't get the job done as a franchise, given the current results, I would be looking at the Chargers as the biggest threat.
I agree. They've already beaten the Chiefs and the Broncos.
Right. That's the feather in their cap, right?
Right off the bat, they've already beaten both of those teams. What I would say, what would give me a little bit of pause about the Chargers right now, and look, sooner or later, sometimes you get over the hump. Lamar Jackson has not played his best football in the playoffs. Justin Herbert has not played his best football in the playoffs as well. So those are 2 teams that are probably going to have a lot to prove, come January. But look, I think they're going to be in the mix for the number 1 seed right now. Again, they're 3-0, and they also beat the Raiders in their division too. So, I mean, they're a good team, and they're going to be in the mix. People are like, well, how are they going to be when they're an LA team? They got to go on the road, and they got to win in January. Like, who says they got to go on the road in January, dude? They're going to be in the mix with the number 1 seed right now. So 100%. I'm not quite as sold on the Colts. I will say, Danny Jones is a fun story, though. You wonder, did Ryan Dable poison his ass in New York? Because I think they probably once or twice this season right now. It's wild, man. Mm-hmm. It's wild. Anyway, all right, let's put a bow on this episode. Back to the Sabres and back to hockey. If you haven't already, make sure you check out 2 in the Box. Chris does an awesome job doing that. Also co-host of the Instigator podcast. You can find him on Twitter X at 2ITB_Buffalo. Appreciate you, man, as always. Appreciate you having some patience because, like I said, the stupid mixer sucks. So some of the stuff we had to do twice, man. But always love having you on the show, buddy.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
All right, guys. I will be back. Matt Warren from SB Nation joins me tomorrow.